Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome in. Thank you all for joining us today. As you're dialing in and getting settled, I'd love if you can drop in the chat where you're joining us from, a little bit about you and what you do. Thanks for being here. Hello from Istanbul. Wonderful. Thank you for joining us. Hi from Copenhagen, Ohio, from Boston. Wonderful. Thank you all so much for being here today. We're really excited for this panel discussion. Hello from Bali, where it's midnight. Thank you for staying up late to join us for this very important conversation. Welcome. So we are joined today by a wonderful panel and appreciate all of our great panelists for being here. If you are joining Remake for the first time, let me introduce ourselves to you. We're a global fashion advocacy organization. As you can see from the folks dialing in from the chat, we really do have a reach across the world, which is just incredible. And we are fighting for fair pay and climate justice in the clothing industry. And we're very near the end of our annual No New Clothes Challenge, which is a campaign we run every year. The focus of the No New Clothes Challenge is to decrease production and consumption of new clothing, because we all know that if we're honest with ourselves, we have enough clothing, there is enough clothing in circulation. Remake also produces a fantastic resource every year, our Fashion Accountability Report, which I've just dropped a link to that in our chat. And one of our key findings from last year's Fashion Accountability Report is this idea around industry degrowth and how it can be applied in sustainable business models. And so we've long wanted to have this conversation and bring in industry experts as well as sustainable brands who are prioritizing circularity to kind of get to the heart of what does true circularity in the sustainable fashion space look like. So as I said, we are joined today by wonderful panelists. I'm going to drop their names in the chat if you want to wave as I introduce you. Alina from Nudie Jeans, Marissa, who is a consultant at Recycling Systems, Nicole Bassett, the co-founder of the Renewal Workshop, and Rachel from Another Tomorrow. So thank you all so much for being here. We will have time for audience questions. So as you have questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat box and we'll be watching that. But without further ado, let's dive right into our panel. So Marissa, my first question today is for you. I'm hoping that you can start us out by explaining the theory of waste hierarchy. Why is reuse one of the most preferable waste management techniques above, of course, landfilling, but also above recycling?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here and see the really amazing turnout from all over the world. It's very exciting. So for me, the waste hierarchy, I think about it specifically from a waste management perspective, which is kind of where it originated out of before it evolved into what we now know as a circular economy hierarchy. So the waste hierarchy itself, you have source reduction before reuse, before recycling, before disposal. The circular economy hierarchy has a little bit more granular detail within each of those buckets. But reuse is towards the top of the hierarchy, mostly because it has a lot of energy and environmental benefits over recycling and then over disposal. So when you reuse an item, you're maintaining all of the embedded energy and all of kind of the life cycle impacts that it took to create that product in the first place. And in theory, reusing an item displaces the production of a new item. And now that's a big kind of ideal system. We know that doesn't happen today. But still, reuse has more environmental benefits and it takes less energy to reuse something in its original form or maybe in a slightly new form than it does to put it through a processing system that requires additional energy to recycle it and convert it into a new raw material for production.
That's really helpful. Thank you for explaining that. I think sometimes, I'm sure many other folks can agree with this, the word recycling just gets tossed around and maybe sometimes even thought to mean reuse, but that's helpful to understand why prioritizing reuse is higher up on the waste hierarchy pyramid. Rachel, we asked Another Tomorrow to be here today because as a brand, you have always had resale baked into your business model. And the company said that its aim is to use resale to reduce the production of new clothing and prioritize resale as that additional source of continued revenue. I'd love if you could talk about this a little bit. Why has it been important to the brand and how has that played out in action?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here. To answer your question, I think from the beginning, at Another Tomorrow, it's been crucially important for us to take a systems thinking approach to the industry and really understand that everything is connected to each other. A part of that system is that we design really high quality clothing and high quality product that's meant to have that extended life cycle because we really value clothing as an asset. And we really want our customers to understand that. So our clothing is designed to last a very long time, whether it's in one person's closet or in multiple people's closet, with the aim of reducing the amount of clothing that goes into landfills. So in terms of process, digitizing our products with QR codes has really helped build out this system. So we wanted to make the resale process as easy as possible for our customers. Right now, someone can grab one of our garments, look at a garment label, scan the QR code. What'll show up is the entire provenance journey of our materials, and then it'll be easy access to resale, size exchange, and return options. So throughout this, we're kind of constantly looking for feedback from our customers to really ensure it is the smoothest experience as possible. I think in order to encourage our customers to be an active member in this circular economy, we have to be able to create easy systems that are enjoyable, that people want to use, that people want to come back to and tell their friends about.
It kind of reminds me of how a few years ago we might have talked about how we needed to encourage more people to shop secondhand. And the thought was we have to make it easier. We have to make it just as accessible for people to do that as it is to shop retail. And the same has to be applied to recirculating our clothing too, because I know many folks in the room, I'm sure, have that chair in the corner of the room with the things that you mean to resell and never get to. So that's really very interesting to hear how you're trying to make that easier for the customer. Alina, you're joining us today from Nudie Jeans and would love to get your opinions on this. Nudie Jeans has always had resale and repair and upcycling offerings as part of your business, which gives consumers a lower impact way to shop, of course. Would you say that these initiatives are viable for other fashion brands to consider adapting to their model? Do you think it works particularly well with jeans, or what are your thoughts of how this could be expanded?
Yeah, thank you. And hi, everyone. It's so good to join you. I'm joining from Sweden, so I'm always like a little bit cautious when I'm speaking in English, it's a lot of native speakers on the call, but bear with me. Yeah, but as you said, Nudie Jeans, we have been working with the repairs and sales of secondhand jeans, so Nudie Jeans, in our stores for many years. But I do believe, of course, that jeans is sort of one garment that you are used to wear for a long time. That is already a timeless garment in itself. But I also think that this is something that can be very sort of widely implemented. But I also think we need to have a few things in mind when we are looking forward to this like change in the industry. And that is something that Rachel already mentioned, but it really comes down to what kind of garments do we produce from the beginning. We need to have that mindset with us from the beginning. So from the design phase, so when we are deciding what kind of fabrics do we want to work with, which fibers do we want to work with, what kind of design do we want to work with, how are our fits? These are really, really important decisions because we want to make garments that people want to use for a long time. And I also think it's interesting to focus a little bit on sort of the production side of it, but because having a sustainable production is also more costly, but that's also reasonable because you need to pay like a proper price for your garment if you're going to have sustainable fibers. We work a lot with organic cotton. The energy that are used in the production, if we want our suppliers to work with renewable energy, for example, they need to make investments. They need to have they have costs to do that change, but also for all of the labor costs, of course. If we want our suppliers to pay their employees good or reasonable salaries, we need to pay a proper price for our garment in the end. So yeah, with having a sustainable production, we can also we produce garments that are a bit more expensive, but I also think that is one of the sort of incentives for our customers to also repair and to use their garments for a long time. And it's also an incentive for us to really focus on communicating the value of our garments, to really show that we care about our garments. We want to resell them again. We believe that these are very, very valuable garments because they are there's a lot of resources put into these garments, and we really try to communicate that. Because on the other hand, if you look at like the very cheap garments that you find on the market today, you find the super aggressive sales. It's like you're pushing trends, and that is also like almost saying like, oh, the garments that we produced yesterday aren't worth anything any longer, buy new ones. So really sort of slowing down that idea of how can we use our garment and what kind of garments do we produce. And I also think it's really interesting to sort of connect that with like, how can we increase consumers' will to repair and reuse? And I think that's really sort of goes hand in hand with this. We need to show that we do our part. We produce sustainable garments. We are willing to pay more for our production, and then the customers can do their part of doing the repair and the use. So we sort of do this together. So it's more of a joint journey we do with our customers than just us or just the customers. Because sometimes we also sort of hear that it's the customers need to change, they need to repair, they need to use their garments longer, but we also need to make garments that people actually want to use for a long time. So long story, but just also to answer the question about denim, yes, that is like a good product to do this with, but I also believe that you can apply this for dresses and for jackets and for shirts. We need to have that value attached to the garment, and also an emotional value, because we need to care about our garments. That's when you repair, and that's when you use them for a long time, when you actually like the garments that you are buying.
It's so interesting because you and Rachel both touched on this a little bit of like the mindset shift that we're asking customers to go on about clothes. And this is a major reason why Remake runs the No New Clothes Challenge every summer. It's not just about not buying new clothes, but it's about taking that pledge to go on the mindset shift, to think about how you're consuming, but also to think about how you're cherishing the pieces that are already in your closet. And so we do really believe in like changing our emotional relationship to buying and caring for clothes as well. So it's very interesting to hear you confirm that as a brand. Marissa, in your introduction, you talked a little bit about how, the promise of circularity, the idea of like what a circular system would look like, but that we're not quite there yet. I think that we've been promised this idea of circularity, that as we buy more used clothes, then fewer new clothes are going to be produced. But we know that that's not really happening right now. People are just consuming more used clothing as well as more new clothing. And that actually means that our environmental impact is increasing. In your experience, have you seen this kind of thing happen in other industries? What could fashion learn from these behavioral patterns?
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about that. And it's hard to make parallels between the fashion industry and other products because of that emotional connection, I think, that people have to their clothing, more so than they have to a lot of other types of products. But I think it's human nature. We are all so cost sensitive and so price driven. And so I think that's how we assign this intrinsic value, this value that we have for all the products in our daily lives. And so if you can buy something reused, regardless of how, you know, high quality it is, but it's a lower price than something equivalent that's new, same quality, we're going to inevitably say like, okay, well, I have the capability, like 2 of these is equal to 1 of these. And so I think that's how we all do that mental calculus around what all the things that we have in our lives and how we shop. Yeah, it's human nature. So I see that more so, I think, with textiles and apparel because of that emotional connection and because of the price points sort of being able in the textile industry in general, and like in terms of apparel, as opposed to, you know, maybe electronics, which is much more of an investment into an item. And then also, if you think about, you know, the recycling industry, I think it assuages guilt a lot, right? You say like, okay, well, since I'm recycling this, I can feel a lot less guilty about, you know, buying a 12-pack of bottled beverages instead of like carrying my refillable water bottle around. And I really think that's just human nature. And I think we just need to do a lot of consumer education and rewiring of our brains and rewiring of, even when we're in a retail store, sort of how we're making comparisons about products next to each other, beyond just the price tag that it has.
That's so true. I often say to people when they're embarking on the No New Clothes Challenge, you can't just copy paste behaviors from when you used to shop fast fashion onto a circular model, because it takes that, you know, rewiring, as you said. Nicole, kind of a flip side of the previous question, you know, companies have seemed to co-opt this idea of circularity for greenwashing purposes. So big brands engaging in resale and rental, but they don't really seem to have the intention of reducing the amount of new clothing that they produce. Do you think this is the case? And are those efforts generally kind of surface level?
Yeah, we're very lucky today to have 2 brands who are looking at this. I would say the opposite of what my answer will be. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. Yeah, I think what's really interesting about circularity is that it's a bit different than how we've looked at like maybe sustainability. So in circularity, it really is the whole system has to be in place in order for you to sort of get the checkbox of circular. But brands are doing pieces of it. And so, you know, if you are really going to be circular, a lot of the stuff that Alina just said is like, you have to build it in from the beginning. So it's like no waste, extending the life of products, regenerative, social justice, those pieces have to be there in the whole system. But that's not to say that if I'm reselling something, that's not a piece of the system. Right. And so you should get credit and brands should invest in that and figure that piece out, but you don't get to stop there. Like that doesn't get you the check mark of circularity. That gets you the check mark of resale. And resale is one piece of a bigger pie. So I kind of liked the pie analogy and say like butter alone doesn't make a pie. You need all the ingredients and then you get to have the pie.
I like that a lot. Nicole or Marissa, do you think that, you know, we talk about what we have now and then kind of the promise of what we want to see. Do you think that we'll get there? Is the impact just kind of slow? What are your thoughts on that? Either of you can jump in first. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I'm muted.
There you go. You're good.
I think we'll definitely get there. I think we can all be optimistic about that. It's just about how quickly we get there and the pathway we take to get there. I mean, that leads me directly into, a talking point around policy, right? I think we're seeing really aggressive policy throughout Europe around EPR for textiles, which is going to change the whole sort of economic model of that system that Nicole was talking about, and being able to develop that system and inject the capital to jumpstart that system. And in the US, we're starting to see that policy discussion emerge as well. And once something like EPR for extended producer responsibility for textiles is introduced, especially at least in the United States, it may take a while for it to get adopted, but it doesn't go away. And so it's really, we're shifting more in that direction. And even in the meantime, we can't wait for EPR to take effect before we start developing those systems. I think there's a lot that we could be doing to, test and start developing those relationships, those business models, and evaluate, the feedstock that we have. But I definitely see it coming. I think we're going to get there. It's really just a matter of time.
Yeah, maybe I'll add, like, I really get up every day and think, what's the alternative? Like, the current model is not working, and like adding circularity or resale onto a linear business model is this like plugin is like not changing the system. And so I think as more examples like these other brands on the call here, and there are a few more, start to show like, oh, this is what it looks like when you embed circularity into the whole product and into the whole system, that there might be more of a flywheel to do it. But it is a huge investment for sure. I don't want to take that lightly, but I think it's also a doable change.
What do we think is a realistic transition timeline, like for companies to be getting serious about circular revenue streams? Anyone can chime in there.
I'm curious to hear from the brands how they're doing it.
We have the last year really reworked or reshaped our circular strategy. In a way, it sort of goes back to where we started, but it's also looking forward. And we call sort of the philosophy of the strategy "Create Tomorrow's Vintage." So we really are trying to scale up all of our circular activities. So we're scaling up our repair service. We're scaling up and trying to communicate even louder about the collection scheme that we have in our store, that so if you have an old pair of nudie jeans, you can turn them in and you get 20% discount on a new pair. And before we only had that deal on the pants, on the jeans, but now we have extended that to all of our garment categories, because we also do jackets and sweatshirts and other garments. And we are really scaling up the resale. So right now we are looking for the right external partners to collaborate with, so we can find the scale in this, because before we have also done this in each store. So we have done this with our own staff, and that has been working, but it's difficult to scale up. So right now we are focusing a lot on seeing that sort of next step, that's scaling up, to really be able to sort of create tomorrow's vintage, with the idea that the garments that we do create today is something that we want to see in the secondhand shops in the future. And to be able to do that, we also need to sort of offer these services to prolong the life of the garments. And it's also a very important step in our climate work that we do. We have created a climate action roadmap to really figure out how can we decrease our emissions with 50% to 2030. That is our goal. And then resale is an important part of this. But then we also need to make it possible for the consumer, for our customers to buy nudie jeans. And we need to really see the scale in that. So we are really trying to make this happen now. But I would lie if I would say that I see this happen among other brands on a scale that we need to see happen today, because I think that we need to do this today to be able to sort of do the changes, because it takes quite a while. But I really I'm hoping, and I'm also seeing that this is something that more and more brands are talking about and are taking steps in the right direction. But I think what we maybe do miss sort of in the industry discussions are the elephant in the room, that we need to decrease the volumes. We can't sell this many new produced garments. And if we're going to sell secondhand garments, they need to be good quality garments from the beginning. So I do believe that a lot of companies have challenges when it comes to changing the production, and to really make garments that are made to belong for many, many years.
Yeah.
I'm interested in your thoughts too.
Yeah, just to add to that, I love that you mentioned about scaling and everything, because as a part of as Another Tomorrow, a startup company that was really grounded in sustainability, circularity, and making these decisions from the start, I've also come from the background of larger companies that I see firsthand. It's really difficult to make these shifts. So when I think about policy and beneficial policy for the environment, for circularity, I also think about the limitations within the current infrastructure. So just thinking about supply chains worldwide and how they're set up, like how many of them are not completely vertical, meaning that from farm to final product, it has to go through a lot of different people, a lot of different facilities. And in terms of thinking about a timeline, I think more about how can we get bigger brands that have the ability to shift some of these systems on board, showing them the value of making this shift, right? Because we have to be able to show economic value. And I think that's one of the things that I've enjoyed so much about Another Tomorrow is that we have this vision of being kind of a living, breathing case study that we can operate in this way. And I think it's just gathering, I mean, everyone on this call is a testament to kind of moving this mission forward, but it's really building out those case studies for larger brands in conjunction with changing the perception of clothing in the media to drive this at a faster rate, because we know that big brands are also going to follow kind of like what culture is saying and vice versa, of like clothing should be portrayed as an asset that can be held onto rather than thrown away. So definitely in terms of timeline, I think a lot about how we can just get big brands on board to shift some of these systems that are really hard to move as smaller brands.
Yes, I'm, reading in the chat and folks are saying some similar things. Like, what about the big brands? How do we pull them along? Someone else writes, I find that there are a lot of motivated people working in the fashion industry. They just don't know what to do. I'm interested if anyone on our panel today, has advice, like how do we start to pull some of those big brands along in these conversations?
I think the acknowledgement of like, if we talk about big brands, most of the big brands are public companies and they're just this criteria of being like, you have to perform in a certain way and there's just no off ramp for them. And so what I think is really interesting is like, but there's also a lot of opportunity because often big brands own multiple brands. And so they'll say like, isn't there an opportunity we could take one of our companies and actually start to pivot its business model out of linear to circular? So redoing the product, redoing the financials, redoing the services, looking at it differently, and maybe picking at each brand slowly over time. And then I think there's also an acknowledgement of like a lot of the big brands that are successful today are because fast fashion was a thing that was very extensive in the last 10, 20 years. And that may just end, like their era may be over and it's like the fall of Rome. And now it's time for a new type of business model to come in. And so maybe that's part of what will start to motivate the companies into like thinking through like how they could get off that like linear path.
I'd like to add to that and say that I completely agree, and it's so challenging. We're talking about such a big scale company like a large brand, but there are things that they can and should be doing to start putting themselves in a position to be able to offer more circular opportunities to their customers, such as start mapping your supply chains, right? Start understanding the different materials that you use and the fiber compositions and the chemicals and the additives and the dyes and the finishes. Start kind of gathering all that information and setting up the internal record keeping system so that you can get a holistic viewpoint on what your impact is and where things are coming from, and how those items will impact any kind of second life or end of life processing that will need to happen for it. Because like I said, we're seeing regulation coming and it's better to get ahead of the curve. What's that? Like if you're not if you're not at the table, you're on the plate, or yeah, I always get that one wrong. But I think that's really true. Be part of the conversation. Start joining some of the voluntary initiatives that are happening, so you can really understand what are the issues that we need to take stock of, and how do we prioritize, and how do we know, what first step to take, and then it's like one foot in front of the other after that, and then we gain momentum. But we could have, the fashion industry is an interesting one to me because there are so many brands that make up the largest market share. It's not like other industries where you have, just a couple brands that you need to convince, and then like they can create a whole market shift. It's different in the fashion industry. So that's what makes a voluntary, initiatives harder. They don't have that same impact in creating change that might have in another industry. But I think there's, still a lot that large brands can do to start preparing.
Absolutely. And everyone here on the call, you are part of that change-making process, right? The folks coming together here today to say, this is the fashion future we want to see. You're going to be part of pushing for that change. And just know that your Remake Ambassador community is here to support you as you continue to push for these things. We've talked a little bit about resale. I'd love to talk a bit about repair. Alina, you to have a repair model at Nudie. How have consumers responded to those initiatives in practice?
Yeah, well, they have responded very well to it, and we've been doing it for many years now, and it started off quite organically in the stores, like 10 years ago when we had much fewer stores than we have today. And it sort of started off with that we had our sewing machines in the store to hem the jeans, so correct the length of the jeans. But then a regular customer came back with their jeans, asking us if we could repair them, and we started to do that. And then after a few years doing this sort of a little bit here and there in some of our shops, we sort of took the decision that this is something that we want to do more on a sort of strategic level, and this is something that should be implemented in all of our stores. So that was also a shift when we started to talk about our shops as repair shops, because we really wanted to communicate that here is a place where you can actually repair your jeans. And now doing this for 10 years, we also see that the demand is increasing more and more and more. And that is also why we have sort of refocused our strategy on scaling up this and work with external companies and external collaborators to be able to meet the demand, because there are so many customers who want to have their jeans repaired, and it's difficult for us to sort of keep up the speed on doing the repairs. But we also see that, customers are really happy to be able to do this, and we have until today we have offered this service for free. We'll see how we do this in the future. I think we will always have the option of having it for free, but if you want to have them sort of expressed, so very quickly repaired, maybe you have to pay a little bit. But it sort of also sprung from the idea that we want to make it possible for all our customers to have their jeans for a long time, so prolong the life and do that really sort of for real and offering this service. And we also see that it makes our customers very loyal to our brand. When I started to work at Nudie Jeans, I actually started to work in the store, and there were a lot of customers coming in and saying, yeah, before I was buying these and these brands, but today I'm only buying Nudie Jeans, and I do this because I know I can have them repaired. So it's something also that we see is really sort of it's valuable for us. It's super valuable to have a customer base that is loyal and to speak, that they are sort of spreading the word about this, and we see that we get more and more customers, and the demand to have their jeans repaired are increasing. So it's been a very successful part of our circular sort of business, and it's also, I think it's funny how it all sort of goes hand in hand with the rest of the activities when you look at the full circle. Because first, of course, you need to do the repairs to prolong the first life of the garments, but having that connection with the customers where they come into the stores, and we can speak to them, and we can sort of look at their jeans together, and we can evaluate if they should be repaired or not. And we always say that we can repair them, but if they don't want to have them anymore, if they don't want to have them repaired, we can take them back in, and we can give them this discount on a new pair. And the jeans that we collect, we use them as patches in the repair service. So we cut them up and use the fabric for some of the jeans. And if they are beautiful, we wash them and we repair them and we sell them again. So I think the starting of having this repair service also made it possible to do the rest of the circular activities, because that really built the relationship with the customer that is crucial if we're going to collect the jeans back to us. And then today we're also working with recycling on a fiber to fiber level, and we do that as well with the jeans that we collect, and we can't use them for the resale or for the patches. So really sort of it has enabled a lot of the development that we have seen during these 10 years, where sort of the repair service was the starting point of this.
And I love that story because it started with your employees having this idea to do this. And I think that goes to demonstrate that we can all make change that really start like a very large strategic change at our company. And I think that's really cool. Nicole, this is a question for you. This is something we hear a lot as well. A common critique or hesitancy around degrowth is that reducing the production of what's produced new is that it would reduce the number of fashion production jobs. Do you believe there are ways to account for good jobs for people in a just transition to a more circular industry?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. So one is that our current industry is based on growth. And anyone who's done sourcing and production in the apparel industry knows that it's harder and harder to actually find workers because there are a lot more options than there had been. And so this sort of dependency on like infinite number of people that are going to show up and be a part of this industry is not necessarily true. So if we think about it a little differently of like, well, what if we just kept production as what it is now? Like, then we're not like necessarily losing jobs. And over time, as there's attrition with workers, there will probably lend itself probably to the timeline in which you're actually starting to see degrowth. I think the other big thing is that we want to be designing into the circular system, workers at the heart of it. So right now, linear is very exploitive. It's saying, hey, I'm going to get the most out of the bottom of my supply chain so that up at the top, I can get the most profit. And so we want to actually start to center living wages around workers and seeing that like, okay, maybe we maybe we can start to change this industry so that the jobs are actually good jobs and we keep those jobs instead of exploiting. The other thing I think that is really important to think a lot about is like how tragic it is, our current behavior of like, we ask workers to work for low wages, to create products that we then send across the country and it has a stain on it and we throw it away. And I think that we starting to really build in the system around this and understanding like, oh, okay, this is a worker who has invested their livelihood in creating something, adds actually more value to the product, holds more value and goes on longer. I think it would be really heartbreaking if we went down to different factories and all over the world and said, oh, by the way, actually, the hour you spent on this, someone's going to wear it once and throw it out. So I do really think it's important that we really keep an eye on like, what do these like production changes start to do globally? And but as a brand, I think it's a thing that we can manage. Like, I don't think it's one that like is going to tomorrow, all of a sudden, we're not going to have like jobs. It's going to be something that occurs over time. And we can start to signal to our supply chain, hey, actually, we're going to make less this year, but because we're making less, we want to change our relationship with you or things like that.
Exactly. We often advocate for that kind of model, paying people higher wages, but producing less and thus slowing down the environmental impact as well as improving the labor situation. For our brands on the call today, can you envision a model built around that, paying more for labor for new products, but then making more off of the whole lifespan of the garment?
Yes, I definitely say yes. This is something that we are really looking into right now. I mean, coming back to what I said in the beginning, having a sustainable production is more expensive. We also do have several projects where we are paying living wages to the factories that we are working with, especially in India and Turkey. But then we do have a lot of our suppliers based in Europe. So that's, of course, a better standard seen to the wages, but it's still like we need to work with the right suppliers to know that they are offering good working conditions, because we do have this issue within Europe as well. So it is more expensive, and that means that we need to sell our garments to a higher price. But it's also interesting now when we try to scale up the reused sales to really see the different sort of product categories or the price differences we can sell our jeans as. So we have like the standard jeans that we are maybe not selling at such a high price. It's more of a come and buy a cheaper nudie jeans sort of offer. And then we have the really beautiful jeans that were maybe dry from the beginning, so non-washed, and then someone have used them for a long time and they are very beautiful, sort of worn in, and maybe made in a very good quality. So we're working a lot with like Japanese selvedge qualities and so on. And we can sell these secondhand jeans for almost more expensive than the new produced ones. So we also see that there's a big like possibilities to earn money on the secondhand sales, on the reuse sales. And that's also an important part of our climate strategy, to be able to sort of increase sales, because we are still a company, we want to grow as a company, to increase sales, but to sort of really decouple that from the resource use and the emissions created in the production. And we see it's possible, but of course we're also we need to see the scale in this. We need to scale it up, and that's where we are trying to explore different options right now. But I definitely believe that this is the way forward.
Yeah, I would definitely say this is something very viable too. From the beginning, we've always believed in paying a premium for fabrics and labor. I think especially for us, we're so ingrained with every part of our supply chain. Like we really want to get invested in where our fiber's coming from. We really want to talk to the mills and see like what their processes are. But for most of the industry, I would say that's probably not the case. They aren't aware of every single part of the supply chain. And I think that's where it can start to get the conversation around labor and getting better wages to those labor workers is first uncovering what is the supply chain of these brands and really digging in deep there, really asking questions of not just like, how much does this garment cost? Because I think sometimes a more expensive garment can be seen to a customer as like, oh, it must be more sustainable or they must have been paid better. But I think it's really about asking as a brand, asking at the supplier level, okay, what are all the steps that needs to be taken? Like, what are things that we have taken as truths and what are things that we have taken as normal? And where can we innovate? Where can we partner with suppliers and really get their input on what they're saying? Because again, a lot of these suppliers, they've been doing this for 20, 30 years. They have so much insight into how their processes work. It's so much better just hearing from them of like how they envision this moving forward, how they envision problem solving. So I definitely think it's viable. I think we have a lot of obstacles to overcome, but very optimistic about this.
Thank you all. This is the last question I have from our panelists, and then I'm going to open it up to Q&A. So please drop your comments in the chat. Marissa, What are the gaps out there, knowledge gaps, policy gaps, data gaps that we need to address in order to make these circularity solutions happen on a more systems level?
I think that some of the biggest bottlenecks right now are, well, okay, so specifically talking about recycling, right? Some of the biggest bottlenecks that there are right now are around understanding the prevalence of blends, fiber blends in the textiles that we produce and that we generate as waste. Because if you want to be able to make that fully circular and recycle the fiber back into a fiber that can be used in new production for textiles, you have to really understand how much, like what's the size of the addressable market for any given recycling technology. Let's say you're a polyester recycler, you need 95% plus purity polyester by weight in an incoming bale. We don't know how much of the waste stream meets that specification. So it's hard to build your business model and then raise the investment that you need to scale when you don't really know what your feedstock is going to be. So one of the things is more data tracking around fiber composition, and also other things like disruptors, buttons, zippers, and also prints and any other things that could be a disruptive or prohibitive in the actual recycling process. I think this can be done several ways. The labor-intensive way is to send someone out into the field with a handheld scanner and their 2 eyes and go and, take data measurements manually. The other way to do it is to eventually, well, I guess there's 3. Another way is to eventually automate the end of life scanning of materials through like an advanced textile sorting facility or a textile material recovery facility, something like that. And the other way is that we could include product passports from the very beginning, the origins, so that that information is just carried along throughout the life of the product. It can easily be recognized at the end. So that's one of the big gaps. Another big gap, I think, is around lack of standardization, both around the terms that we're using throughout the industry. Like you mentioned, reuse and recycling get conflated a lot. And also standards around within the industry, for example, standardized bale specifications. So if a large scale textile sorting facility were to be developed, or a current one were to advance its operations to include some kind of fiber sorting, it's hard to scale a system where you're producing a bale based on your specific buyer's specifications. Whereas in the traditional recycling industry, there's an industry-wide accepted specification for a bale of, used beverage cans or PET bottles or corrugated cardboard. And so anyone generating that bale knows that as long as they follow the spec, it'll be worth X amount on the market, right? And so it creates sort of that consistency, that reliability that everyone, whether you're a seller or buyer, can rely on. So, and then of course policy, right? I think policy is supportive policy is really critical to create leveling the playing field and unlocking that investment and freeing up the funds that we need, because it's not rocket science, the recovery side of things, right? We know what needs to happen, and we know we need to scale it, and we know even kind of like what technologies we need to use. So the reason it hasn't happened yet is because of the business case. The business case is not attractive enough yet. And so with policy like extended producer responsibility paired with something like performance metrics around recycling rates or collection targets, or requirements around minimum recycled content, or even in the reuse realm, like, and degrowth and reducing production, I think regulation is key. So I think those are kind of some of the biggest bottlenecks that I see.
Thank you. Okay, so from our questions, one of our commenters writes, what are the ways that we as sustainable fashion advocates can encourage circularity and degrowth in the industry, besides things like just voting with our dollar? anyone can feel free to jump in.
It's a difficult question, but I think that asking questions to brands, start to ask questions, start to like read on the information they have on their website, their sustainability report, to try to understand and try to ask tricky questions. We get a lot of questions and we think that's good. Especially I think today there is a lot of greenwashing out there. There are a lot of brands trying to only speak about the things that they do good, but also try to sort of read between the lines. And if a brand is also speaking about the things that aren't as good or what their challenges are, I think that's a really good sign, because then they're open and they're willing to be transparent with the challenges as well. Yeah.
I would add just like it's sometimes like in these moments where you're like, I don't know what I can do. It is kind of the most simple things, like even just talking to a friend and say, hey, what do you know about fashion? Here are some things I know. You don't have to buy new. There's lots of other options. Ask the brands, write a letter to a brand, like an actual letter, and say, circularity is important. It's so many times I sit in meetings and in the middle of the conversation, oh, customers don't care. And it's like, oh, okay, well, why is that the sentiment? And so lifting that voice, those little things are added together, eventually start to make that change. And so even though it may feel small, it's actually really important.
Absolutely. Another one of our commenters writes, I don't think big brands are necessarily the place to start. I think building collaborations is the most viable near-term strategy. Your thoughts or any examples on collaborations?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, especially because it takes people across the value chain working together to make this shift. And so proving it or trialing it or piloting it at a smaller scale with a full spectrum of those stakeholders can prove the business case. And I also think that, so RRS, the consulting firm I work at, runs a program called Next Cycle. And it's kind of like an innovation program, pitch competition, accelerator thing. And one of the values of that is that it brings all of those stakeholders together so that they can start making those connections. And a lot of them have kind of spun out into these formal business partnerships where they're actually working together to create this industrial symbiosis or this mini scale ecosystem in their local environment to prove out that business case. And I think that's where you uncover a lot of very real challenges that are going to need to be addressed at the larger scale anyway, right? And so I think that starting with the more, proactive, smaller group of people that represent all of those roles is actually very effective.
Yeah, and I would say also just the reason that collaboration is so important is because it builds a case for bigger brands. So I think starting with collaboration in the case of us at Another Tomorrow, what has been really interesting is working with like suppliers themselves on projects that they're working with. So for example, like there is a very small percentage of farms over the world that are actually producing organic cotton or organic agriculture, and really building into those systems. It becomes expensive for a lot of farmers. It becomes expensive for a lot of suppliers, and really building out projects of like in transition cotton or supporting farmers that are trying to make these changes, and being able to start at that small level to then scale up and then to invite bigger brands to be part of the solution or see how it has value to the larger system at in general.
Wonderful. Another question is, thoughts on current EPR policies that have been introduced. This commenter is asking specifically about New York, but maybe just in general. Any thoughts? Marissa, I know you mentioned EPR policy.
Yeah, the theory of EPR is very promising. In reality, there's a lot of devil in the detail of EPR. I personally, from my career perspective and in my professional career, I'm a big advocate of EPR. I think it could create the change that we need, but we have to be really careful about crafting it appropriately. We've learned from a lot of failures around EPR, at least in the United States, I can say. There are some carpet EPR laws that have been total failures that we've learned from. There are some electronics EPR laws that we've had a lot of really interesting learnings from. And so textiles is it's the new frontier for us around EPR. I think a lot of the conversations that are happening in Europe around EPR, we need to learn from those without trying to recreate the wheel, but every political environment and every government is different. And so I think there's a lot to be said about harmonization, but it has to be a lot of intentional conversations with a very wide variety of stakeholders to make sure that we're crafting EPR the right way in the first place. And so I think some of those voluntary industry activities that brands or really anyone can be a part of is starting to create model legislation that people can agree on. Because let's say, at least in the United States, let's say EPR in California is passed, right? That a legislator in another state is just going to pick up that language and use it. Like I've even seen bills come out where like they cross off electronics and they write textiles, right? And so like that happens. And so we need to be really careful about how we develop these EPR laws, knowing all the ins and outs of the industry, current and future state that we want. So yeah, that's what I'll say about that.
Thank you. And I think this will be our last question of the day. The question is, do you think bans of textile waste within municipal solid waste will create the conditions or demand for textile recycling? Or should we be creating the conditions and recycling system first and then enact the bans on the waste?
I'll jump into this one. In my industry, we always say no ban without a plan. Bans are really horrible if there's no alternative for handling that material, because it just leaves everyone in crisis, right? You could implement a ban, but then if there's no collection system, if there's no service providers, if there's no recyclers or reuse opportunities, I mean, like, what are you expected to do, right? So I really do think that we need to create the system, or at least time it so that there's some coordination between the system development and any kind of restriction that you might implement on bans. And that goes for export bans too, honestly, not just disposal bans. I think that we need to think really carefully about just blanket adopting any kind of bans.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Everyone, if we can please give a warm round of applause to all of our panelists today. Thank you so much for your time. This has been a really fruitful conversation. We appreciate you all so much. I really encourage you to follow along for future programs like this. You can find us at Remake Our World. And do check out our Remake Fashion Accountability Report and keep your eye out for the next round of this report coming soon. We appreciate you all for being here, and let's continue the conversation. Bye-bye, y'all.